Thanks, Geoff, for making time to be here today. Are you still in Hong Kong?
Yeah.
You're still in Hong Kong? Okay, awesome. Great. So maybe what I can do is briefly introduce the group to Geoff so that he has a bit more context about who's here, and then briefly introduce Geoff to the group, and then we can get started with questions from the students. Is that okay? Okay, awesome. So welcome to another week of Rocket Academy Q&A. Geoff, for context, the students here are mostly from Rocket Academy's bootcamp. We offer a 6-month bootcamp course for people who are not software engineers or who didn't study computer science to become software engineers. Primarily, we're focused on Singapore. So everybody in this, all the students in this room are in Singapore and planning to apply for jobs in Singapore. And they're going through this 6-month bootcamp. Some of them are in the Rocket Academy's batch 1, which started in October last year, and they're graduating in April. And some of them are in batch 2, which started in January and graduating end of June. And then there's one of us here, Jo, who's from batch 3 that's starting in April, but she's here because she wanted to meet you and all that. So right, the students are at varying degrees in the middle of this 6-month boot camp where they learn sort of all the aspects of software engineering ideally that you would need to succeed as a junior engineer. And a few of them are quite close actually to applying for jobs. They're going to graduate in April, and so they're really starting to think about strategizing where to apply, how to look good on their resumes and whatnot. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah. And then so everybody's a career switcher. Yeah. So didn't study computer science, and most people are within a few years of graduating. Some people are a bit more. Yeah, that kind of thing. And yeah, and yeah, that's I think that's the intro about the students. A brief introduction for Geoff. Thanks so much for being here today. Geoff is actually a childhood friend of mine. We both grew up in Hong Kong together. I actually met Geoff through playing tennis at this club called this random country club that we used to play tennis at. And Geoff and I happened to both overlap. We kind of went different ways because we were in schooling in different countries for a while, and then we overlapped at Stanford, where Geoff studied Earth systems, not computer science, and Geoff was representing Stanford in swimming. So he was essentially like a very, very high level swimmer. And then after Stanford, he became a professional swimmer. So he was training full time for a number of years and represented Hong Kong at the Olympics in 2016. And sometime after the Olympics, Geoff decided to switch careers. And Geoff can go into this in more detail. He joined a boot camp called the Wagon in London. And yeah, Geoff can also explain why he chose to move to London and those details. And after the Wagon, Geoff joined BCG, which is one of the top management consulting firms in the world, to join their digital ventures team, essentially a relatively new arm of BCG that is building technology, building tech products for their clients. And Geoff started as a software engineer there, has been a senior software engineer there, and can share more about his journey there. Great. And yeah. Great. So I think maybe I'll hand it over here to Geoff, and then we can open up to questions from the group.
Yeah. So
awesome. Thanks, Geoff.
I suppose we can just start because pretty much everyone here is doing a career pivot. So maybe I can start talking about that because it is a pretty scary change. So yeah, I was a professional swimmer. I was basically the same year as Kai at Stanford, and like he said, I was not a coder. I did not study computer science before, and the long story short is that I moved to London to just go on a new adventure. I did an internship in private equity, real estate private equity, and I just found that I was more curious about the tech world, And I felt that to get into the tech world, I should probably understand like the backbone of it. So what is like the underlying thing that makes everything work? Um, and I mean, I never intended to be a software engineer. So my goal was actually in 2018 after my internship was to do something scary, to find a new job and find something new, um, and to pick up a new skill. And going to a boot camp, I mean, learning how to code was scary. I don't know. I mean, you probably all feel now that prior you that did not know how to read a line of code to now you're writing lines of code is just, I don't know, it's like some form of enlightenment. Definitely for me, I feel that way. Um, and like basically a few weeks into the boot camp, I sort of realized like, hey, there's actually like a real creative element to coding. I like to describe it as like you're a bit of like a software poet. You want to write elegant code, you want it to run quickly, you want it to to be concise as well and to achieve what you're trying to do. So given that I found that interesting, I just decided to just pursue it a bit further and make my entry into the tech world be, I mean, logically it made sense. Having done like an entrepreneurial software engineering bootcamp to pursue like a first job in that. So that's basically how I went. It wasn't like, you know, I didn't have like super big ambitions. I just was curious about it and I kept going. So, I mean, to make a pivot is not easy, but I would say that in doing so, you learn a lot about yourself along the way. And actually, I think the diversity of background makes you stronger, especially if you want to, I don't know what all of your goals are, but especially if you want to work in like an uncertain environment like a startup. I think it just, you know, that kind of diversity of thought really helps.
Hi, Jeffrey. Yeah, this is Alvin from Batch 1.
Yeah,
Yeah, so other than pivoting from being a private equity intern to a software engineer, you have also pivoted from being a professional athlete to a private equity intern. So
yeah.
which process do you feel was more, I would say, thrilling for yourself? And which one do you think was more difficult?
I think both were thrilling in itself. Like, you know, working in an office, working like just it was just so different to, you know, being in a Speedo like most of the day. So and just like yeah, I mean the different environment, anything that's new will be thrilling. And secondly, like, sorry, the second question was like, how scary was it? Or
yeah,
it was like really quite scary, I would say, but I don't think I really thought too much about it. I was more focused on like, I think the mindset was super important. It was just beginner's mindset, trying to learn as much as I can, seeing, you know, where are the overlaps between the professional athlete world and the other working world that we're all in. And just trying to draw like high level parallels between the two. And I think that helped make me feel more comfortable. And so especially if you're all trying to pivot, right, like from all your prior careers, just drawing from like the high level stuff that you've learned. So, I mean, even things like, you know, as an example, in the professional athlete world, I would always analyze my race videos, like training videos, everything, just super high attention to detail. And, you know, that is something that carries over to literally every single profession if you want to be good at it. Like, you know, attention to detail, finding bugs, you know, making sure that you are, you know, catching everything. So I think that helps make things a little bit less scary. But for sure, I definitely, you know, as someone who didn't start learning how to code when they were 12, I think there's always going to be a bit of imposter syndrome, but I think you can, in some way, like, yeah, I mean, you can use that as an advantage, as I said earlier, by thinking differently.
Hi, Jeffrey. My name is Kenrick. I'm from Batch 1. I just have a question of like, when you first started at BCG, you were an associate engineer. So do you do coding or, and okay, did you do coding? That's the number one question, because I don't know whether associate engineer is the same as a junior developer. So that's the question I'm asking. Second question I'm asking is, do you think that it was your Stanford background that got you into the door, or maybe your business logic that helped you secure a place at BCG? And like, okay, how much do you think, like, if you were to put like a percentage, like how much of that business knowledge you had from, or the business logic you had from Stanford and from PE that rolled over that play a part in you getting the job at BCG?
Yeah, I think so the first question, like as an associate, like junior engineer, I mean, thankfully, like we have a really good culture at the company. Like on my first day, the goal was, you know, let's get Geoff a PR and a pull request and merge it into master. You know, it was just like, yeah, I think it really depends on what company you join, and the culture that, you know, I think really good companies have are, let's get even junior engineers to write code and be code reviewed and, you know, have it contributed to the project. So for me, that was like a really good experience. And yeah, I mean, like, I think being in a culture where they set you up to succeed and also support you in ways that helps minimize risk of like error is super desirable. And then in terms of the second question, like, okay, yes, I went to Stanford, but I think the more important thing is like how you come across in your interviews and the work that you put in. Because, you know, like you can find a way to beat someone who might have like, you know, this like stamp on their CV or whatever because they went to, you know, a good school. But I think if you show that you've done the work and you really make an effort and there's an alignment of culture and like you know who they're looking for, then I don't think it really matters. So in my experience, you know, like, do I think it helps me? Maybe I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that like I you know, I pretty much like broke my back like in the interview process, like trying to, you know, it was a challenging interview. And like I think it's all about, especially at the junior level, it's all about looking for those people who step up, who apply themselves, who hustle, all that kind of stuff. And I would focus less on like the distracting things like what school you went to and that kind of stuff, if that helps.
Thank you for your answer.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and
Sure.
thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us. I'd like to ask if you felt disadvantaged in any way by not coming from a coding background when you started out in your career.
Yeah, I think there's going to be like disadvantages and advantages here and there. I'd say like disadvantages, just sometimes when you it's like when you don't know the things that you don't know, and some of the more like technical elements that, because like I think boot camps are great because they're designed in a way not to scare people away. Like I think one reason why it's so hard to learn how to code on your own is because of like how complicated it can look, and you just like don't really know where to start. And in a way, for like as a disadvantage, when you don't know like certain like base computer science theoretical principles, the code that you write might be inefficient, and some things you just miss. But those are things that like you can pick up along the way as you go deeper. And yes, there were times where I felt like, oh, you know, if I had done a CS degree, I would know this, or if I had picked it up earlier and had more time to play, I would know this. But I think there are also other advantages of me not having studied CS, because, you know, to build a good digital product, you need a really good focus on who the customer is, and remembering that whenever you're building something, it's not, you know, you're not writing lines of code just for the sake of it. It's literally that, you know, you're writing lines of code to solve a customer problem. And I think when you think about it that way, then and then you work backwards, then although you might be disadvantaged, you know, you have colleagues that might have studied computer science, and you can, as a team, work together on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeffrey, Veena here.
Hi, Veena.
So yeah, I would like to know about the interview process you have gone through BCG, and yeah, and also how, what are the challenges you faced while working with the team, with a team of I mean colleagues who have already had a CS background, and yeah, I mean, what are the challenges you faced in your journey in that?
Yeah, so I think depending on where you apply to and what company you're looking at, the interview processes will be different. Like from my experience, you know, it was like a series of like in-person chats back when we used to be able to see each other in person, followed by, you know, like whiteboarding sessions together, just, you know, talking about like approach to solving technical problems. Like I think various companies do it differently. Like, you know, at other big companies like Facebook and Google, I hear, you know, you're writing code together. I had those experiences when I was interviewing with other places. And then you'll also get, like for me, like the project-based interview. It's like, given this problem, like how would you build it, or pick whatever tech stack you want, and just build something that solves the problem. So you'll get a whole range of things, like, you know, pair programming to whiteboarding to sometimes you build something for them as a take home. Like, does that answer your question? I think it really varies. And then there was a second part to your question, which was, again, sorry.
The challenges you faced on coping up with the team, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Working with the team who are much more advanced. I think if you pick a good company with a good culture, those perceived challenges will be learning opportunities rather than something that makes you feel inferior, because they'll always be willing to help. I think sometimes it can be intimidating when someone is like so good at something. But I think it really depends like who you're working with. And I see that as like a positive, that there is someone to learn from. And you can really leverage, like, you know, talk about your experience in a different light and try apply it to this new experience where it's much more technical. But yeah, I never really saw it as like a disadvantage, I would say. I'd use it as like, I'd view it as one way to make me a better engineer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. This is Joe here.
I do.
My question to you is that what would you advise to us, like we are in the middle of our boot camp or just starting out, so that we can use this opportunity in the boot camp and learn better so that we will be better engineer in the professional world? So what are a few things you would advise us to work on?
Yeah. So variety of things. I think so. Every bootcamp curriculum is different. I would say the things that, so from my personal experience at the bootcamp, where I lacked, I think, was some experience in writing in test-driven or behavioral-driven development. So TDD, you'll see a lot of that on like job descriptions. And just like that flip of the mindset in how you write that, I think focusing a bit on how you like on that before you write code is a good professional thing to do. So if someone said like, you know, gave me a small feature to build, I wouldn't just immediately start writing code and thinking about you know, what code needs to be written to create this feature. I'd think about the requirements and translate that into then writing tests. So like if you were to completely follow it 100%, I would write, you know, say there was an API endpoint that was supposed to return a list of orders, and I would basically write a failing test that would say like, you know, hit this URL, and I would expect, you know, this array of objects to come back. And given that I haven't coded anything, obviously then the next step is like, right, I need to actually follow the errors, the red errors that I get, and start building like an actual endpoint that I can make a request to. So that's something that I think would really help, because a lot of companies I mean, if you think about it, you really want to prevent bugs, and the way you do that is by writing comprehensive tests so that you cover like the edge cases. You build things well and in a robust manner. So that's one. Two, I would say, like, again, instead of like jumping straight into writing code, take a step back and like think about the high level picture, and maybe read a bit more in depth. And getting to know what kind of framework you're using to develop a certain product. And because it's like, the analogy would be like, say you have a car and you need it to go from 200 miles an hour to like 500 miles. You could buy a new car that gets you 500 miles, or you could just understand your 200-mile car a bit better under the hood and make modifications there so that it gets you to 500. And so I would say having a bit more of an understanding of how a particular framework works will help you professionally when you go outside. And I say that because I did a 9-week bootcamp. It was really quick, Ruby on Rails, and I was productive, but under the hood and like how things are put together and the value of a framework like Rails, there's a lot of they talk about magic in software. If you can understand what goes into creating that magic, that's going to make you a better engineer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those were really valuable piece of advice. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. So read the documentation. It's boring, but I tell you, the payback on investment for reading documentation is like top.
Yeah, at first it feels like they are written in alien languages, but I think we'll get a hang of it soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Geoff.
Hey.
Hey, my name is Jikon. Thanks for coming. I just want to ask, like, you know, how's like your role like with BCG, and you know, how do you guys operate like in terms of I don't know, is it like on project basis? Is it like, are you a part of a roving team? And what are the kinds of projects that you work on?
Yeah. So if you go to our website, you'll find that the company is split up into a bunch of different cohorts at Digital Ventures. So just like super high level, I mean, there's like engineering, product, design, venture architects, which you would basically, that's like a business role. And we've got growth as well. So you can think of growth as like growth marketing, ads, SEO, that kind of stuff. And like, I suppose how we operate, much like in the consulting world, we do rotate around different ventures and projects, and they vary in length depending on what the particular project is. What's really cool about DV is, well, if you think about the life cycle of a startup, you go from like, I don't know what the idea is, but I recognize that there is a problem, to developing an idea. You call that like, innovation. And then, well, okay, now you have an idea. Is this idea actually worth anything? Like, are people interested in using this product that might come out of an idea? And so you'd seek to test it with people, with users. And you would want to validate that your idea has, A, a market that it can, serve, B, that people like it, and it solves a problem. And then once you understand that, you can then go and actually invest more resources into actually building like your first MVP, your prototype. And I suppose like that, if you think about that whole process and that life cycle of creating digital product, the way we do things at DV is very much like that. We'll take clients on a journey to, I mean, it really depends like what the issue is, right? So I would say, depending on what project you're doing in the company, it could be all three of those stages. It could be one part of that stage. It really depends.
So do you have any experiences that you can share with us? Like, what do you do, like maybe most recently, or the most impressionable project that you're working on?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't like talk really about the details about the work for confidentiality reasons, but I can say though that the most interesting projects, and that I think would really help you all when you go on your job search in terms of what kind of experience you want. The most interesting things for me were like the greenfield projects, where it's like no line of code exists and you're going from scratch. That's like that's where you like really learn. It's like someone says, I need this API for something, and you're like, okay, well, what language am I going to do it in? Like, what framework will I use, if any? How many customers is this going to serve? All those kinds of things, I think, are the most interesting. And so the projects that I've enjoyed the most have been where I've had the most leeway to create something, a project where I've been on early. So when literally there has been no line of code from the beginning. And so I'd really like look for those kinds of projects, because that's where a lot of learning comes, where you have to set up things from scratch. Whereas like, if you think about, you're an engineer at Facebook per se, right? Everything's there already. We're all using it. And so any modification you make will be like a bit more icing on top of the cake, rather than like the foundations of the digital product, unless you are building a new digital product. Yeah.
I see. Thanks so much for your insight.
Yeah.
Hi, Geoff. This is Jeremy here. I have a question. I'm curious about what went through your mind when you first graduated from bootcamp. Did you, for example, always know that you wanted to work in a consultancy, or like were you also considering startups or banks and things like that? So what helped you eventually make up your mind to go into a consultancy? And my second question is, if you could turn back time, would you do it any differently?
Yeah. So what was going through my mind after I finished the boot camp? I was like, I need a break. I was quite tired. I actually, yeah, I had my cousin's wedding in Alostar in Malaysia. And I went with my aunt for a bit of scuba diving, and then I went to the wedding. So I really didn't do much after. But in the meantime, I was like searching and applying for jobs and firing off resumes and stuff. I think so that was going through my mind, and I also like was also starting to think about like, right, I just learned all this stuff. How can I play with the things that I've learned? And there was like a small little project that I was thinking of in the boot camp that I just started working on a bit after, just in my own time, just for fun. So there was like, okay, recover. It was like quite intense, let everything sink in, start playing a bit and having fun with what I learned. So that was kind of what was going through my head. And then secondly, if I, could turn back time and would I do anything differently? No. So the story of what actually happened was I was a teaching assistant at the boot camp after, and that was actually really helpful in solidifying what I had learned.
Yes. Teaching, yeah. Sorry, I'm just asking some of these guys if they're interested.
Yeah, no, it really, I think it really does make a difference, because then when you're from the teaching perspective, there's a saying like, you only really know something if you can teach it to someone. And actually in that act of teaching it, you're just reinforcing what you've learned. I wasn't actually really quite strategic like that. I wanted to go work for a bank or consulting firm or whatever. My main goal was to learn about startups and entrepreneurship. And that was actually why I picked at the time the Wagon, because the last 3 weeks of the boot camp, it was all about just building a project in a small team. And so when I set out, my criteria, I suppose, was, small company, building something interesting, good culture, startup culture, environment, diverse. And what actually happened was I happened to meet, as a teaching assistant at the boot camp, I just so happened to meet a recruiter from DV. I had never heard of DV before. It was just like serendipitous. And when I spoke about hustle earlier, I mean, the story was like, I noticed that she was meeting all the students and I was a TA, so I wasn't being met. And so I actually asked the office manager, hey, can I chat to this lady? Who is she? And yeah, like I found out a bit more about the company, and what stood out to me was, startup culture, working in small teams, although it is like a bigger company worldwide, the teams that I would be working on are small. That fit my criteria. Entrepreneurial, thinking about new things, also fit my criteria. And I just sort of fell into it like that. So it's really a matter of what you're looking for. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeffrey. Yeah, Ian here. So I saw your presentation on YouTube at the Wagon. Just the one where you talked about like focus and goals and mindfulness and like I think Parkinson's law and stuff. Yeah, so there's this spirit of like excellence and self-awareness that about you that I really do admire.
Yeah.
Just want to ask, like, what continues to inspire you on your life journey as a person, at this point of time? Could it be to still continue doing something scary or to pick up a new skill? How does this relate to your background as a Olympian or your current vocation as a coder?
Yeah, so I think part of me, there's like, in terms of like the spirit of getting out of your comfort zone, I've 100% carried that over from my sporting career. Like in a hard training session and coach asks, to do something very painful, and to really push your limits and put yourself out there. I think that's why that's what kind of draws me to the entrepreneurial world and the startup world, is because you really have to, I think I enjoy the grind a bit. And I think what inspires me now is, so we're all given the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel when we join the company. And Peter Thiel talks a lot about how a lot of businesses out there are not doing anything new. Like to go from 0 to 1 and create something that is adding like real value to the world is very, very, very difficult. And I think that inspires me. Like, I'd like to find something where I could contribute to creating something that hasn't existed before. And so that, I think, as a person drives me, because otherwise I find life a bit boring. So I think, yeah, I mean, that comes a bit from my athletic career as well. Just constantly trying to, you know, break my own personal records and do something I haven't done before. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I do have another question as well. So like at BCG, I'm sure you must have like seen quite a wide range of seen and built quite a wide range of digital solutions, and in the context of entrepreneurship. What do you think are the big like trends in digital entrepreneurship? Like, for example, you know, is the sharing economy still in, or is the gig economy going to be like is it still gaining as much? It's still growing at the same pace as it was, like I think a couple of years when it first started to become a thing.
Yeah. I think the trends that I've seen have been quite specific to individual clients and the space that they operate in. I would say, actually, if you talk about like macro themes, like AI, ML, big data, like using data for making better, more intelligent decisions, I'd say there's like a huge trend for that. So I don't know necessarily about like gig economy, sharing economy. Like, I think that's all really quite powerful, which is why actually the way I thought about it for software is like, if you understand how to manipulate data and to like read this data, I mean, software engineering or coding in itself is like another language. And you can be a part of that language by understanding it. Like, we might not all be like AI and ML, you know, data scientists, artificial intelligence engineers, data engineers and stuff, but I would definitely say that that space of using all the data that we create every day, every time we search anything on Google, etc., is really, I mean, how you harness that is one thing, but I'd say there's a big trend towards, you know, making a bit more use of the data that we create, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Hi, Geoff. Zeph here. Could you share a bit about your career progression? Like, at what point did it become like, okay, you're good enough to, you know, be like, oh, now you're a senior associate engineer. Then at what point do you become the senior software engineer and so on? So forth? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like really that's a very good question, because it's like how and this is something I've struggled with in general, like ever since coming to the non-athlete world, is like very different to swimming. How do I measure my progress? Whether it's within the company or just for myself. Because in swimming, it was like, this time is lower than that time. It's super black and white. I think it comes down to your level of independence when you're building something, and it's definitely like, if I was to say like what are some of the top skills that software engineers have, is just like your ability to Google and figure stuff out. So Joe asked earlier, like, how can how can one, think about the things that might help? I said read documentation. I'd say like being able to find that documentation in the first place, being able to like have an instinct and know where to find out answers, when it's like right to ask a senior for advice. All those kinds of things I think really really help. And so actually getting promoted to being a senior engineer, it came completely by surprise. I was so focused on what I was building that it at that point had not crossed my mind. So I think the way I measure it is, I'd say the more advanced you get, the farther away you are from thinking about how do I write this code that produces this feature. You start to think more about architecture, the bigger pieces in something. So Joe asked earlier, like, okay, what other things outside the bootcamp can you work on? I actually say, like, this is something I lacked as well, is thinking about the big components, architecture of software systems. So you can write code, right? But then this code needs to be run somewhere. It needs to be deployed in multiple environments so that you can test, and then have one environment just for your customers at the end of the day in production. Like all these things, like depending on, I'd say at the beginning, it's more worth it to focus on like, pure, can I write stuff in this language? Can I manipulate data in this language? And then you can branch out further to, okay, I've got this code, how do I deploy it? Well, there's a super easy way like Heroku, which is very user-friendly to start off with. But then obviously, depending on the size of your business, how many people you need to serve, your budget, Heroku then becomes very unscalable. So then you need to think about what are all the Lego pieces that I can use to deploy this thing successfully and serve people and have it, have it really like 99, 100% uptime and be there to serve. So that is, yeah, that's what I would say. You start to think, as the more senior you get closer actually to more product management roles. You get closer to thinking about architecture of the system, how you will balance like the load of like thousands of customers in your software system. You start to think about security. That's also another thing I would put on your list to like read about. The security of your applications. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Hi, Geoff, Jerome. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time, and I've been taking notes. It's really, really good. I just wanted to find out more about your process. Like you talk about reading documentation. I mean, I'm sure you read and you store the notes somewhere. But I mean, at your level now, you also there's even more maybe different languages like you mentioned. Maybe how that fits into the bigger picture. I'm just wondering, like, do you like do mind maps or like, and yeah, just generally how do you absorb, the business side, the tech side, and like how do you like, put everything together at least in your mind, and yeah.
So sometimes it's really quite painful to read documentation, and at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. And so I would say, like, get the gist of it and start playing. And you'll find out more details about it later as you encounter problems. So how I process information. So oftentimes, like, say you are asked to incorporate a particular integration into an app that you're making, right? Like, say, take Stripe. That's quite a popular one. I need payments on my site, and Stripe has an API. And there's like an API key that I can use so that my API can authenticate with Stripe's API, and everything's secure, right? Stripe will come with some documentation. You can like, copy and paste that documentation over and just like not think twice about it. Or you can just understand like, okay, if copied and pasted this code over, which they say is how you should you create a wrapper essentially for your API to interact with the Stripe API. But then fundamentally, like you are, you know, say I've added a Ruby gem, like what is that doing? All I've done really is I've included another module somewhere that someone else has written, and incorporating it into my project. And like calling this particular function is doing something. And so I try to think about it that way. Although I'm copying and pasting something, how does this work under the hood? And why can I just take this and just put it in my code? And then once I understand something like that, I can think about how can I apply something like that within my own code base. So, you know, you talk about like service. I don't know if you'll talk about this, but definitely in my bootcamp, it's probably not advanced enough, but you can think about like a particular file of code being like a service for you to reuse within your application. And that's really not so much different as to, you know, you're incorporating like the Stripe gem, but it's just within your code. And you start, like I start to just digest that kind of high level thinking and understanding like, right, what, is this a lean structure that for code that I'm writing? Is it reusable? Is it easy to test? These are all things that you then start to think about when you start applying. So I try to like apply myself as much as I can and like get my hands dirty.
Thanks so much, Geoff. So to summarize, it's like you try out the code practically and all that. You don't bother too much about, you know, like understanding, you know, when you talk about reading documentations, really, like really doing it and just trying each piece and understanding each piece while trying, and then you understand, and that's like enough to know that you know what you know.
Yeah, but just like understanding like, so the documentation for Rails, for instance, I think is quite good. Because they talk about like, you know, this is how you achieve security for search, right? And then they talk about the underlying reasons for why they need that. And then in some cases, they talk about the actual algorithm that's used. So when you compare like two strings together, what is like a safe way to compare two strings so that you prevent like SQL injection or that kind of stuff? And the further you go and being curious about that's like an example of like, oh, actually, you know, I've learned about security. I've learned about what goes under the hood and what's like automatically included in some frameworks, and what in more micro frameworks, actually that's not there. So just by like moving from different, I think that's one of the positives I've taken away from doing different projects, is like we've used different tech stacks here and there, and some things are given, some things aren't, and you understand like, oh, why isn't this there? Does that speed up the whole application? Does it not? That kind of thing.
Yeah, very helpful. Thanks so much.
Hi, Geoff. It's Elvin again. So I have a question regarding like how teams work in in DV. So I would assume that since that there are quite a number of divisions, like you mentioned, there's the architectural division, and then there's I would say there's your division, and so on and so forth. So how often do you like interact with people from other divisions? And when you follow on a project with a client, how often is it that you follow the client until the I would say the deployment phase of the product, or like when the product goes to the market? Yeah, how often does that happen?
Yeah. So in terms of interaction with other disciplines, I'd say pretty much every day. We have a stand-up every day, just the product engineering and design team, to talk about work yesterday and what's coming up front. And bi-weekly, well, depends on the, you know, what kind of work setup or what cadence you are on. You'll have like sprint planning sessions. So what in the next week or next 2-3 weeks you want to achieve as a team. And you need multidisciplinary interaction for that so that you can create a good product. So I'd say, you know, that's really good, and it's how other startups will do it too. Then, sorry, the second question was
like how often is it that DV works with the client until the product becomes open to the market?
So it really varies on what we're building, who the client is. It'll vary a lot. Sometimes it'll be, you know, you'll be working very, very closely with them to create the product. And I'd say like actually one of the strengths of DV is that you are working with, you know, renowned clients and have a lot of knowledge behind them. And it's, you know, we try to bring like the best of like our methodology with theirs together to create something even stronger. So that's, I mean, that's why like DV is known as like a corporate investment startup incubator. It's the strength of both like our entrepreneurial background with, you know, the client's like established competitive advantage. And then you'll have other projects where you have a, you really take them along the journey of like creating something, because the best way to build a good product is like not necessarily to have a lot of bias in terms of what you think is going to work, but you want to let your customers tell you what's going to work. And so sometimes it's a real, I mean, it's a whole learning process, trying to like where your product gets up to is maybe not necessarily what you think it's going to be. So we have like guesses and we'll have hypotheses of what may or may not work, and we'll go on a journey with the client to build something that is desirable.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I have a question, Geoff. So we were talking a bit about the interview process earlier, and you were saying that it's really challenging, right? When you graduated from Wagon and you were talking to a few companies. Could you share more about what were the most challenging parts of the interview or the interviews that you faced? For example, in the second half of our bootcamp, we're doing quite a bit of data structures and algorithms to prep students for those types of interview questions. Of course, students are working on portfolio projects throughout the course as well. But what were the most challenging parts of the interview process for you that you felt like bootcamp grads can kind of prepare more for?
Yeah. So oftentimes, like first software engineering job, I think the more interviews you do, the better you get actually as a junior engineer. I definitely along the way, if I had interviewed with where I am now first, I wouldn't have gotten the job. It actually came like 2.5 months after I finished the bootcamp, after I had interviewed with a whole bunch of other places. What helps is understanding how you react in a situation where you have no idea, like zero idea how you are going to build it. Because when I, as like an anecdote, when I got the challenge for this company, I was just like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here. To put things into context, I just spent like 9 weeks, which eventually culminated in building a full stack, like monolith Ruby on Rails app. And I'd never built like, you know, microservices. Have you all heard of microservices before? We haven't
really talked about it, yeah.
Okay, but microservice, there you go. That's like a word out there that's going to be like, oh my God, what is that? I did not know that actually in the real world, you start to think of things like different Lego blocks. If you think about like what Facebook is, you know, it's definitely not like one full stack, you know, web app. So for me, it was just like, holy crap, I just went from 0 to 100, where now there's this separation, like almost like division of labor. So my advice would be to have like a process that you follow in stressful situations like that. When you get asked a really difficult question, say you are like sitting next to someone and you're pair programming, I think it's okay to say, sorry, I don't know, but this is like how I'm going to approach it. You know, I'm going to look stuff up. I'm going to Google. I'm going to like figure out for yourself what your process is in handling those situations. So Google is your friend. Understanding that Stack Overflow is also your friend. Understanding that, you know, you should also go to documentation. You should read, like, you could just say like, sorry, I don't know the answer, but this is actually what I would do in order to come to the right solution. Because more often than not, at the junior stage, it's like how you approach the problem rather than your actual prowess with code. Because no, I think it'd be pretty unfair to expect like someone who's just done a boot camp to be able to write, you know, this crazy algorithm or feature. And this is where actually you can use your experience from previous jobs to help you. Yeah.
How so?
So like you know, previous managers asked you to do something difficult. Like, how did you approach that, and how can you apply it to this new problem? It's just a different medium and maybe something like a different way. But you know, like I said earlier, attention to detail. If someone says like, can you find the bug in this code? Well, I mean, if you or someone who really pays attention to detail, like you can try apply that to that situation, albeit, you know, it's a bit of a different setting. Things like that. So yeah, that would be that would be what I would say in the interview process. Yeah, and show your thinking as well. Like talk out loud, you know, like, okay, I don't know this, you know, talk about the process and break everything down into smaller components as well. Well, it will help like what's that saying? Like cognitive dissonance, or when someone like throws such a hard question out there and your brain subconsciously freaks out because it doesn't know what to do. And if you break it down, you can solve it piece by piece.
Awesome. I think wow, this somehow an hour just flew by. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. Maybe one final question for Geoff would be would be to ask for any general advice that you might have for bootcamp grads who are about to embark on this new career and new journey.
I would say kind of like how I talked about earlier, number one, understand what you're looking for and the type of culture and team that you're looking for. And I think it's okay for you to not know what kind of engineer you want to be, front end or back end. I'm not sure, Kai, if you've all spoken about that in the future, but I didn't know for myself. And I'm primarily a back-end engineer now, but I think it's really important to understand both. But I would say the most important thing is like the environment you're going to go work in and the team that you join. Are they supportive? Good team culture. Secondly, like the size of the team, it was important to me. I think it's really key because I think that also really impacts your learning opportunity. And I would index on the learning opportunity that you would get. So like, are you just going to add, you know, small additions to a really big product, or are you going to have the opportunity to be a junior on a team that's developing something new? Because you'll see a bit more of that whole, you know, development process that way, which involves architecture and involves thinking about scale and that kind of thing. Does that make sense? So just to recap, culture, learning opportunities, size of team and product. And think about like the role as well. Are you being pigeonholed early, front end, back end? Like for me at DV, like I came in, I could go either way. You know, it wasn't like you are straight up at front end or you are straight up back end engineer. So those are the things I think about.
Amazing. That was super, super helpful. Thanks so much, Geoff, for your time and advice today. That was really great. Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.